There she was, lying in her bed, with her neck exposed and her hair all across her pillow. Her skin was so fair that the veins in her neck were hard to miss. It was like she was asking for a bite. And before she knew it, a painful sensation started to spread all across her body. She was bitten, and the marks in her neck were there as proof. She opened her eyes and she thought she would see an animal that had attacked her. But this was not the case, although some could argue that this was a beast of some sort. In the corner of her room stood a tall individual, a pale man-like figure with long sharp teeth at the corners of his mouth. He was breathtakingly beautiful, too beautiful to be a human. It had to be a vampire. Hi everyone and welcome to a new video. Since it's October, I wanted to talk about a spooky subject, like I did last year when I talked about the origins of Halloween. This time I wanted to talk about a creature that has inspired me and intrigued me since I was a little girl. This creature is also very popular when people are trick-or-treating because many people go dressed as one of them. I think people who are around my age are probably familiar with stories like Bram Stoker's Dracula and the movie with Winona Ryder and Keanu Reeves. And of course the Twilight Saga, Vampire Diaries, the Interview with a Vampire, and one of my favorites when I was little, the Underworld movie series. Girls love to fantasize about an immortal, beautiful man with supernatural powers to sweep them off their feet and take them into their bizarre and mysterious worlds. And maybe some boys also like to fantasize about that. But vampires were not originally like that. They were evil beings, cursed, manipulative and hated by all the people and also feared by them. They preyed on human beings for their blood and kills most of them in the process. In this video I will discuss their origin, the inspiration, vampires in modern stories, vampires of the past, the history, and also why we are so intrigued by them. And of course many more things. I am really excited for this one. I really love vampires, so I really hope you're gonna enjoy this video. So come out of your casket and join me in the world of the living to suck in the knowledge about these very interesting blood-sucking creatures. The first mention of creatures with vampiric characteristics go as far back as to ancient Greece. There were stories of creatures that attacked people in their sleep and drained them of their body fluids. But they were not necessarily undead people. They had different names like the Empusae, Lamia, Mormo and the Strigas, which might sound familiar if you've read the Witcher books. They also had different appearances. I will discuss some of them with you. The Persians were one of the first civilizations who had stories about blood-sucking demons. Ancient Babylonia and Syria had tales of the mythical Lilutu. She was considered a demon and she was portrayed drinking the blood of babies. There were also the Astries and they were said to roam the night among the Persian people to look for victims. The Empusae is very interesting because they were shapeshifters. Most of the time they preferred to take the form of a beautiful woman so that they could seduce men and eat their bodies. They were controlled by the Greek goddess Hecate. She was a mysterious ancient Greek witch and goddess of magic, ghost, the moon, the night and crossroads. And especially the crossroads beyond the realms of the living. So you can see why vampires are associated with her, since they also dwell between these realms. In the Mesopotamian religion there was Lamasthu, and she was the most terrible of all the female demons. She slew children, drank the blood of men and ate them afterwards. She had a lion or bird head and she was known for her evil deeds. She could cause women to miscarry, infest rivers and streams, cause nightmares to sleeping individuals, and she could also cause diseases and sickness to whoever she sets her eyes on. The Manananggal from the Philippines was an evil spirit that could detach her torso from her lower half and would fly off during the night to eat infants. The name was derived from the Filipino word tanggal, which means to separate, which of course was given to this creature because of the ability to detach her body. She was described as a beautiful, slightly older woman who had bat-like wings, and she preyed especially on pregnant women who were sleeping. Which is not the first time that I heard this story. I really enjoyed this story. It's a legend from Australia, from the Aboriginals, and this creature is called the Yara-ma-yha-who. I really hope I say it right. This story is a bit disturbing, but okay. The creature was a little red man with a large head and a toothless mouth. His fingertips looked like the suckers on the tentacles of an octopus. It was said to live in fig trees and would only be active during the day. It did not hunt for food, but it waited in the tree until an unknown traveler would sit under the tree or stand under the tree, and it would attack them right away. He would jump out of the tree and would use his suckers to get attached to the body of the person and suck out the blood. After he was done draining the victim, he would also eat the victim. He would swallow him whole, and this was an easy task because of his big head. Then he would drink some water and take a nap. After that, he would spit out the victim, leaving it shorter than before, and the victim would also have a reddish tint. If they would repeat this process, the victim would become a Yara-ma-yha-who himself. And the last creature I want to discuss is from West Africa. The Ashanti natives believed in a vampire witch called the Obayifo. These witches could inhabit the body of any man or woman, and they had shifty eyes. And they were also very obsessed with food. And I can relate to that. They were able to shapeshift to fly, and they hunted during the night, like almost all the creatures I mentioned. Of course, there are many other creatures with similar stories from all over the world, but if I would talk about all of them, this video would be like 5 hours long or maybe even longer. Their appearances could differ immensely, but they all had one thing in common. They all needed to consume a living being to sustain themselves. So as you can see, there are many different types of vampires, but there's one that we all know. And this type of vampire was created by Bram Stoker in his novel Bram Stoker's Dracula. It has inspired many books and films since he introduced us to Count Dracula in 1897. But he was not the first person to write about vampires. In the 18th and 19th century, vampire hysteria peaked in Europe, especially in the eastern parts. There were a lot of poems, plays and stories about vampires. Especially about vampires who seduced women to drain their blood. Children and even adults were very scared to sleep during the night. Their world was already very gloomy, but the fact that they believed that vampires were real made it even worse. Many people were dying in the 18th century. There were a lot of diseases and plagues, and they did not have a cure. Nobody could explain where they came from or how to avoid them. There were no medical explanations, but the people desperately needed one. So they decided to look at the corpses of the people who didn't make it to look for supernatural explanations. They dug up the corpses and they were shocked when they saw the cadavers. They were not dead at all. They looked alive. Their hair had grown and their fingernails as well. Their bellies were full and in the corners of their mouth was blood. There was only one conclusion. These dead people were turned into vampires. Of course, nowadays we know better. They are just natural symptoms of decomposition. When your body decomposes, it also dehydrates. This exposes the nail beds and the hairline because dehydration shrinks the skin. And this creates the illusion that the nails and hair have grown. When you recently died, your stomach still contains some bacteria. And these bacteria create gases that fill the belly, which makes the belly look bigger. And this would also force blood and matter out of the mouth, which would explain why it looked like they were bleeding from the sides of their mouth. Back to the past, they did not know these facts back then, so they kept digging for proof or an explanation, literally. They started to dig up bodies to look for evidence. They dug up so many bodies that the Empress of Austria, Maria Theresa, established a law that made it illegal to tamper with a grave. But before she did that, she sent her own physician, Gerard van Swieten, to look if these claims were true. When he reported back to her, he told her that he did not believe that all these human beings were turned into vampires, and that's when this law came to be. Other countries would also establish the same law. Eventually, the vampire mania fizzled out, I think because of the lack of evidence, but they would still be very relevant in folklore and stories. Their appearance in these real-life stories differ very much from the stories we have nowadays. These vampires looked like living corpses because they were actually corpses, but not the living corpses that they thought they were. They were just dead. Nowadays they are mostly described as too beautiful for this world, with fanged teeth, red eyes and a pale silky skin. Most of the time they are young and sometimes they have wrinkles. They are charismatic, dazzling and of course mysterious. They draw you in like a magnet, like a lamb ready for slaughter. There are a lot of traits that a vampire can have in the stories. Sometimes they could turn into bats and fly off in the night, or they could consume a life force of a living creature. In other stories they can't walk in the sun because sunlight will kill them, or they have otherworldly super strength or speed. They are afraid of crucifixes and their reflection is absent. They don't get diseases, and when they are injured they can heal exceptionally fast. Sometimes they can sleep for ages in their tombs to come back even stronger. They can have an hypnotic or sensual effect on their victims. And one that I always liked is that they can't cast shadows, which makes it harder to see if they're in your room when they are hiding. And because pictures are made with light, this also explains why you can't see a vampire on pictures. But how do you become a vampire? If I would look as good as the vampire in modern stories, I would like to know the answer as well. I could throw away all my exfoliators and moisturizers and I would never need a beauty sleep at all. Of course, the obvious answer is when you are bitten by a vampire and you are still alive, you would become a vampire yourself. Some people believe that you could become a vampire by sorcery or when a cat would jump over a corpse. It could also be a curse, especially when you committed suicide. In some cultures, they believed when you were born on Christmas Day and the baby would already have teeth in their mouth, they would become a vampire. I have never seen a baby with teeth, but maybe they are there, I don't know. But let's be real and very, very clear. There is no way to become a vampire. The world would be too overcrowded and it's already dead, so maybe it's for the better. There were many ways to kill a vampire, most commonly by impalement. This happened especially in the Slavic countries, and they would use special wood to do that. In Russia and Baltic states they used ash wood. In Serbia, hawthorn, but the most popular wood was aspen. And the biggest reason for that is because they believed that Christ's cross was made with aspen wood. Sometimes they would make wooden crosses to place on the graves to prevent the vampires from rising during the night. Or they would use a pointy piece of wood to stab the vampires right in the heart. In Russia and in northern Germany, they would prefer to stab them in the mouth. And in Serbia, they would use it to stab it in the stomach. Decapitation was also one of the most preferred methods, especially in Germany and in Western Slavic areas. They would bury the head between the feet or even further away from the body so that the soul would depart earlier. Romani people would use iron or steel to stab into a corpse's heart, and they would place bits of steel in the mouth, over the eyes, ears and between the fingers at the time of the burial. And this story is true because corpses with objects like that were found in Bulgaria in 2006 by archaeologists. There were many other measures that people took, like pouring boiling water on the grave or on the bodies, shoot a vampire with silver bullets or drown them in the water. They would place garlic around them as protection for the vampires because they did not like the smell. Sometimes they would cut the corpses into many pieces and were set aflame so that they could destroy the body as much as possible. You could also expose a vampire to sunlight, and this would have the same effect as burning them at the stake. When you think of vampires, you can think of Edward Cullen, Bella, Elena, Regis, or Lestat. But the most famous vampire of all is one we all know, Vlad Dracula. What you might not know is that Dracula was actually a real-life person. No, he was not a vampire, but he was a prince. Bram Stoker used him as inspiration for his novel Bram Stoker's Dracula, which he wrote in 1897. And Dracula was known as Vlad, the son of the dragon, because Dracula means dragon, but his most famous name is Vlad the Impaler because he really liked to impale his enemies. He was a prince and a military leader of Wallachia, which was a principality that joined with Moldavia to form Romania in 1859. He was a cruel man and he was feared throughout Europe. He was born in Transylvania, a mountainous region which is now located in Romania. This was of course the perfect setting for Dracula's castle in Bram Stoker's book. It is established that Vlad the Impaler killed at least 80,000 people during his life. So you can see why he's an interesting person to use in a story. Far-off lands are always mysterious and intriguing, and the mountain landscape would lend itself very well for a scary, spooky castle in the middle of nowhere. Vlad himself was very bloodthirsty and religious. You could even call him devilish, and that's how people viewed vampires as well. Creations from the underworld or even the devil himself. In Bram Stoker's book, Dracula is a count, so not a prince, and he became a vampire after his beloved wife died. He did everything for the Christian faith by fighting for them, but when he returned to his wife, she was no longer alive to welcome him back. He was furious, heartbroken, and he damned God. This act turned him into a vampire. He lived for hundreds of years and became more evil, preying on innocent victims and consuming their blood. Dracula is an interesting story because it tackles many different subjects. He does many bad things, but you also sympathize with him sometimes. Especially because he was not born a monster, but he was human once, just like us. And he just loved someone so much that he didn't want to live without her, because he could not handle the pain he felt. Bram Stoker's Dracula is arguably one of the most important work of vampire fiction. This story would inspire many stories thereafter. These vampires would look very similar to the vampire described in Bram Stoker's Dracula. They were most of the time wealthy men who would lure women and seduce them and make them fall in love with them. And most of the stories were set in the 18th or 19th century. Interview with the Vampire became the next major book written by Anne Rice. In her books, the vampires were self-loathing and showed more of their human emotion. Louis and Lestat were relatable characters that people really grew to love. Her book was so popular that she wrote even more books which became known as the Vampire Chronicles. Later books like Twilight would focus more on teenage vampire love in modern times. These vampires were able to walk in the sun and they would sparkle. And one of the things that I thought was very creative was that these vampires could also become a vegetarian by eating animal blood instead of human blood. On TV, vampires have periods of being popular. After Buffy the Vampire Slayer, vampires returned to their caskets for a while. There were some movies about vampires, but Twilight really brought them back, and paved the way for other stories like The Vampire Diaries and other supernatural shows like The Immortals, Teen Wolf and the Interview with the Vampire series. I can talk about vampires forever, but unfortunately I am mortal and I don't have the immortal life of a vampire. I am obsessed with them. And this is not strange because they have been an obsession for many people throughout all the years. They have been popular for centuries. But why are we so intrigued with vampires? What is it that makes them relevant till this day? One of the biggest reasons is because they are timeless. Literally, they can live in every single century because they are immortal and they have existed in our stories for thousands of years. The promise of something eternal holds a special allure. Another reason is because vampires are often depicted as tall and handsome, which is especially triggering for females. It may sound weird, but it's natural to think that they are attractive, especially as a woman, because when we look for a spouse, we want somebody who can live a long life. And of course, vampires are immortal, so the chances of survival are bigger. So it's just biology messing with you. And if I can speak for myself, most women, me included, love bad boys. And vampires are bad boys. They drink blood, prey on people. That's bad. They are mysterious loners who only come out during the night. And since you are on a mystery channel right now, you love mystery, so you also love a mysterious man. And let's be honest, girls and boys, who doesn't think that that's interesting? Besides that, vampires are most of the time centuries old and they have old values like writing poems, opening a door for a woman or man, courting women. In most stories they are emotionally available, which is also something it's hard to find these days, and they have big fangs, which intrigue us as well. In some cultures they used vampires to explain the dangers of sex. They lust for women and the women give in to their own desires, which ultimately results in the vampire sucking the life out of them. No happy ending there. Another reason is that vampires are most like us. Most monsters or evil beings don't look like humans at all, but vampires have been humans once and they still look like humans in their appearances. Only now they are immortal. The only way vampires can survive is by drinking our blood. And since they are mostly like us, we really like to fantasize about being a vampire. It's not that hard to think about it because you can easily pretend to be one, since they are a lot like us. What would I do if I was immortal? How would I use my abilities? Could I stop myself from drinking human blood? And what would I do if all my loved ones are dead and I'm the only one who's still living because I'm immortal? These are questions we could ask ourselves. Oh, vampires, they really are eternal beings because we keep them alive with our stories. And I'm not ashamed to say that I fantasize about vampires sometimes as well. I'm not Team Edward because I was Team Jacob, but I do love to watch all the Twilight movies every year, and I love to read the books, watch Bram Stoker's Dracula during Halloween, and also watch Interview with the Vampire and other stories. Many humans don't like the idea to be forgotten when they are dead, so the thought of an immortal life is alluring. But we should be glad that we don't have that, because now we can enjoy each day even more, because we know we won't have them forever. With that being said, I really hope you enjoyed my video about vampires. I really love doing the research and making this video. They are, of course, as you know, one of my favorite beings. And I really hope you learned some new things because we already know a lot about them. If you like this video, you can subscribe to my channel. I really try to upload a video at least one in the 2 months, but I'm currently doing some exams, so I don't know if I have a lot of time, but I will promise you that I will release one video this year at least, but hopefully more. If you like it, give me a thumbs up. If you liked even more, you can subscribe. You can also suggest a subject in the comment section. And I really hope to see you next time. Have a nice Halloween. Bye.